Hey, everyone. I hadn't planned on sharing this, but it's been weighing on me so much that I just need to get it out. I'm 29, and not too long ago, I proposed to my girlfriend of 4 years. She's 28. Let's just say things didn't go the way I'd hoped. Actually, didn't go as planned is an understatement. It was about as far from a fairy tale moment as you can get without calling it a complete disaster. But before I get into what happened, let me give you a little backstory. We met 4 years ago at my old job. I worked in IT, the kind of guy who could fix any computer issue but wouldn't say much while doing it. I kept my head down, did my work, and counted the hours until I could go home and unwind with YouTube. And then, there was her. She was my total opposite in every possible way. She worked in marketing, arguably the most extroverted department in any company, and she absolutely thrived on attention. When she walked into a room, you could feel the energy shift, like someone had just flipped on a switch. She had this way of making even the most boring story sound like the funniest thing you'd ever heard. People naturally gravitated toward her. Normally, I wouldn't be drawn to someone like that. I'm the quiet type, the guy who avoids the spotlight at all costs. But there was something about her, an energy I couldn't ignore. What started as casual lunch break conversations turned into inside jokes, then into something even bigger. Before I knew it, I was actually looking forward to going to work just to see her. I hadn't been looking for a relationship, but somehow, I was completely drawn in. Then, I got an offer for a new job. I figured I had nothing to lose, so I took a chance and asked her out. To my surprise, she said yes. Our first date was at this quirky little Italian restaurant, and I remember thinking, wow, she's even more amazing outside of work. She was funny, sharp, and surprisingly a great listener. She loved being in the spotlight, but somehow, she made me feel like I was the only person in the room. Everything escalated quickly from there. Within a few weeks, we were officially together, and everything just felt right. Of course, we had our differences. She was all about parties and social gatherings, while I was more of a stay-in-and-order takeout kind of guy. She'd drag me to events, and while I'd complain at first, I almost always ended up enjoying myself. She had this way of pulling me out of my comfort zone, and honestly, I liked that about her. Over time, we built a life together. We found a cozy downtown apartment, divided up chores, and settled into a rhythm that worked for us. She met my family, who are loud, loving, and a little overwhelming, and I introduced her to the quieter side of life. Lazy movie nights, peaceful hikes, just enjoying each other's company without all the noise. I won't pretend things were perfect. We argued sometimes, mostly because of our differences in social habits, but we always found a way to meet in the middle. I really thought we were building something solid. For the past year, our conversations about the future had gotten more serious. Marriage, kids, the whole package. She dropped hints about wanting a fairy tale wedding, and a few months ago, we even went ring shopping together. She tried on a few, casually mentioning which one she liked. Nothing too flashy, but nothing tiny either. I took mental notes, figuring out how to get her the perfect ring without completely draining my savings. And by the time I finally decided to propose, I was convinced I had it all figured out. I'm not the type for big, over-the-top gestures, so I wanted something meaningful but not excessive. I planned a day filled with her favorite things, brunch at her favorite cafe, a pottery class, she loves anything artsy, and a sunset walk by the river. It felt like the perfect balance of thoughtful and romantic. For dinner, I made reservations at this little spot we both loved. It wasn't a 5-star, fancy restaurant, but it had this cozy charm, warm lighting, intimate atmosphere, and food so good it made you question all your life choices. To me, it was perfect. The whole day went off without a hitch. She seemed happy, really happy. She smiled, laughed, leaned into me while we walked along the river. Meanwhile, inside, I was a nervous wreck. My brain was running a million miles an hour, rehearsing what I was going to say, making sure I wasn't acting weird. Every so often, I'd subtly check my pocket to make sure the ring was still there. Then, dessert arrived. I knew it was time. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like the entire restaurant could hear it. I reached into my pocket, stood up, and dropped to one knee. Her eyes went wide, and I tried my best to steady my voice. "I love you more than anything," I told her. Or at least, I think that's what I said. Honestly, I don't remember the exact words. My adrenaline had completely taken over. "Will you marry me?" She didn't answer. She just stared at me, her fork frozen midair. And then, the whole restaurant seemed to go silent. Or maybe that was just in my head. I had imagined a gasp, maybe some happy tears, or even her launching herself into my arms. What I didn't expect was the way her expression changed. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't even shock. It was hesitation. She looked like someone had just put her on the spot in front of a packed auditorium and asked her to recite an equation she'd never seen before. Her mouth opened slightly, then shut again, like she was grasping for the right words, but couldn't find them. And then, after what felt like an eternity of silence, with every eye in the restaurant pinned on us, she finally spoke. I can't say yes to this. For a second, I thought I must have misheard her. Maybe she was just overwhelmed. Maybe she needed a moment. But no. Right there, in front of everyone, she started explaining. This wasn't the proposal she had imagined. She wanted something grand, something extravagant, something that felt worthy of the moment. She had pictured her family and friends there, a professional photographer capturing the whole thing. Oh, and the ring. Apparently, it wasn't what she deserved. Now, let me be clear, I didn't just grab the first cheap ring I saw. I had spent months saving up, making sure it matched the style she had pointed out. It wasn't tiny, but it wasn't some enormous, movie star-level diamond either. It was elegant, meaningful, or at least, I thought it was. But there I was, pouring my heart out, and all she could say was that the proposal and the ring didn't meet her expectations. She kept repeating that she loved me, that she wanted to marry me, just not like this. I had no words. But somehow, I managed to stay composed. I let her words settle for a second, then calmly shut the ring box and slid it back into my pocket. All right, I said, my voice even. If this isn't what you want, that's fine. But let's get something straight. We're either in this together, or we're not. She blinked, caught off guard, then mumbled something about needing time to process. I wasn't going to beg. And I sure as hell wasn't going to start making promises I wasn't even sure I wanted to keep anymore. But then, almost as a test, I added, if the ring is the issue, I can get a different one. It's not a big deal. Her expression shifted instantly. A small, almost victorious smile crept onto her face, like she had won something. She didn't say yes. But she didn't argue either. And in that moment, something inside me changed. I stayed outwardly calm, but deep down, a voice in my head was telling me, this isn't just about the ring. Something's off. And for the first time, I wasn't going to ignore it. That night, we went home, and she acted like nothing had happened. Like we hadn't just had one of the most pivotal moments of our relationship fall apart in front of a room full of strangers. But I couldn't shake the feeling in my gut. The next morning, I woke up with a tightness in my chest. She was in the kitchen, humming to herself, making coffee like it was just another day, while I sat in bed, trying to make sense of everything. We'd been together for 4 years. She loved me enough to talk about marriage, but not enough to accept my proposal unless it met some arbitrary standard. The proposal wasn't good enough. The ring wasn't good enough. I kept telling myself that she hadn't actually said no to me, just to the way I had asked. And maybe, just maybe, this was something we could work through. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was my older brother. Now, my brother, he's 30, is one of those guys who doesn't sugarcoat anything. He's smart, straightforward, and has zero patience for nonsense. We're close. He's always been the person I turn to when I need an outside perspective, someone to call me out if I'm being blind to something. As soon as I answered, his voice came through the line, direct as ever. What the hell happened? I sighed. I wasn't even surprised that he already knew. So I gave him the short version, the proposal, her reaction, her reasons, and how I had told her I'd get a different ring. There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then, in that no BS tone he always used when he saw right through me, he asked, "You're not actually okay with this, are you?" I hesitated. I mean, it's not ideal, I admit it. But she still wants to marry me. She just wants everything to be perfect. For her, my brother shot back. Where do you fit into all of this? Did you even want a big, flashy proposal? That question hit me harder than I expected. No, I said honestly. That's not me. I thought I planned something meaningful for us. There was another pause. Then, my brother said something that made my stomach drop. Are you sure this is just about the ring and the proposal? Because something about this doesn't sit right with me. I frowned. What do you mean? He sighed. Look, I'm not trying to make you paranoid, but women who are crazy in love don't react like that when the man they want to marry gets down on one knee. I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening around my phone. I don't know, man, he continued. It just doesn't add up. And then, for the first time, he hesitated. Like there was more he wanted to say but wasn't sure if he should. I sat up, my heart starting to pound. What kind of feeling? I asked. And that's when things really started to unravel. I hadn't planned to dig into anything, but then something unexpected happened. One of her friends, someone she'd recently had a falling out with, reached out to my brother. For whatever reason, she decided he needed to see something. Screenshots. At first, I wasn't sure what to make of it. Maybe it was just meaningless gossip, some personal drama that didn't concern me. But when my brother hesitated before sending them, I knew something was off. When I finally opened the messages, I felt my stomach drop. It started off harmless enough, just her venting about how the proposal hadn't been what she expected. But then the conversation took a turn. She admitted that she loved me, but she couldn't stop thinking about someone else. She described him as charming, successful, everything she had ever wanted. And the worst part? She wasn't even sure who to choose. She talked about how both of us wanted her, how she felt torn between two options like she was picking out a dress instead of a life partner. Reading those words made my chest tighten. The way she compared me to this other man, the way she seemed to weigh her choices like she had all the time in the world, it was like the last 3 years meant nothing. My brother had been reluctant to show me, but there was no way I could ignore it now. The more I read, the more everything started making sense. Her reaction to the proposal, her hesitation, the way she had made it about the moment, the ring, the details, when in reality, it was never about any of that. She had been questioning this relationship long before I got down on one knee. That realization hit harder than anything else. I had been ready to marry her, convinced we were building a future together. But now, I wasn't sure I even knew the woman I had spent 3 years with. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. She sat across from me at breakfast, scrolling through her phone, laughing at something on her feed, making small talk as if everything was normal. But now, I saw things differently. She had been more guarded with her phone lately, tilting it away when it buzzed, leaving it face down when she wasn't using it. At first, I hadn't thought much of it, but now, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Over the next few days, more cracks started to show. She'd go out for errands and take longer than usual. She started dressing up more, even for simple things. Her explanations didn't always add up. One day, she mentioned having lunch with a friend, but when I casually asked what she ate, she hesitated before giving 2 different answers. It was a small thing, but it was enough to confirm what I already knew. She wasn't being honest with me. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I watched. I listened. And I let the truth unravel on its own. That night, my brother called again. Her friend had sent more screenshots. The messages made one thing painfully clear. This wasn't just a moment of doubt for her. She wasn't struggling with fleeting feelings. She was seriously weighing her options between me and someone else, like it was a decision she could afford to take her time with. I had spent years believing we were building something real, something lasting. But now, all I could think about was whether I had been the only one who ever felt that way. I wasn't the type to overanalyze things or let paranoia get the best of me. But I also wasn't going to sit there and let myself be made into a fool. This wasn't just about the proposal anymore. It was about trust. And I wasn't sure if there was any left. My brother's words echoed in my mind. I deserved better than this. And he was right. I hung up, sitting in silence for a long time, running through every possible way to handle the situation. Waiting for her to slip up wasn't enough. I needed to know the truth, not through guesses or suspicions, but through facts. When she mentioned having dinner plans with friends later that week, I paid attention. The details came too easily, too perfectly rehearsed. She listed names, picked a location, and gave a time, all without hesitation. But something about the way she said it felt off. It was too smooth, too practiced. I let it go, acting like I believed her. Then, on the night of the dinner, I waited exactly 10 minutes after she left before grabbing my jacket and heading out. The unease in my chest only grew as I drove. I wasn't just chasing a suspicion anymore. I was searching for something I already knew was there but wasn't ready to accept. Following at a safe distance, I watched as she drove right past the Italian restaurant she had claimed she was going to. Instead, she pulled into the parking lot of an upscale steakhouse on the other side of town. I parked a few spaces away, my heart pounding, watching as she stepped out of her car. She wasn't dressed for a casual dinner with friends. The tight black dress, the high heels, the carefully done makeup, none of it fit the version of the night she had described to me. It wasn't just the outfit, though. It was the way she carried herself, the way she checked her reflection in the window before walking toward the entrance. Minutes later, 2 figures approached her, but it wasn't Lucy and Jess. It was one man. He was tall, effortlessly put together, and walked with the kind of confidence that came from knowing he never had to think twice about what anything cost. His suit was sharp, his car was the kind you didn't see parked outside regular apartments, and the way he greeted her left no room for doubt. He placed a hand on the small of her back and led her inside like they had done this 100 times before. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, taking in every second of it. There was no mistaking what I was looking at. This wasn't a casual dinner. This wasn't a friendly outing. I wanted to march inside and confront her right then and there, but I held myself back. I needed to see just how deep this went. An hour passed. They finally emerged from the restaurant, both laughing, leaning into each other in a way that made my stomach churn. Then, just as they reached her car, it happened. He kissed her. My whole body went rigid, fists clenched, but I didn't move. I forced myself to watch, to take it all in, because this was the moment where all my suspicions became undeniable. She giggled at something he said before sliding into her car like she hadn't just burned the last 3 years of our relationship to the ground. I didn't follow her home. I didn't need to. I already knew how this would go. She'd walk through the door, still wearing that same easy smile, spinning some story about how much fun she'd had with her friends. She'd probably throw in some random detail about the restaurant, just to make it believable. But as I drove back, everything started clicking into place. The rejection of my proposal. The lukewarm reaction. The nitpicking over the ring, the carefully worded not what I dreamed of excuse. It had never been about the proposal itself. It wasn't even about the ring. She had been comparing me to him the entire time. It didn't matter what I did or how much thought I put into it. I was never going to be enough in her eyes. Not compared to the fantasy she had built around someone else. The dream proposal she wanted had never been about love or romance or even family. It had been about status, money, the image of success. She had been keeping me as her safe option while deciding whether he was worth the risk. By the time I pulled into the driveway, any doubts I had left were gone. This wasn't about me not doing enough. This was about her making sure she always had a backup plan. When she got home that night, I was waiting. She walked through the door with that same easy smile, the kind she wore when she thought she had everyone fooled. The way she casually dropped her purse on the table, moving around the room like nothing had happened, made my blood simmer. She was going to sit there and lie to my face. I leaned back, appearing relaxed, watching her closely as she recounted her fun night out with Lucy and Jess, even throwing in a light-hearted anecdote, probably one she had rehearsed. I stayed calm, playing along just long enough to see how far she would take it. Then, when she least expected it, I let my first test slip into the conversation. A simple, harmless question. Something she should have been able to answer without a second thought. And just like that, the cracks started showing. At the steakhouse on the other side of town, she reacted instantly, her head snapping up so fast that I almost found it amusing. The shock in her eyes was unmistakable. She tried to recover, but the hesitation gave her away. I let the silence settle between us, watching as the color drained from her face. She scrambled for an explanation, grasping for something that would make sense, something I might believe. Her excuse was weak. She claimed to have been at an Italian restaurant with friends, but I knew better. Standing up, I moved toward her slowly, watching as discomfort took over. She shifted uneasily, already knowing she was cornered. There was no mistake here, no misunderstanding. I hadn't misheard. I had caught her lying. And those so-called friends she mentioned? They didn't exist. The truth was simple. Instead of a girls' night, she had dinner with a man. Not just any man, but someone whose car alone could wipe out my student loans and still cover a luxury vacation. Someone who clearly had the kind of money that made her reconsider her options. She barely had time to process before her panic took over, and she demanded to know how I found out. But the answer was obvious. I had followed her. I had seen everything with my own eyes. The dinner, the effortless laughter, the way he placed his hand on her back like he belonged there. They hadn't looked like two acquaintances sharing a casual meal. They had looked like something more. She was frozen now, caught in the moment, unable to find an escape. I gave her a chance to speak, but no words came. I simply waited, letting her feel the weight of her own betrayal. Eventually, she managed to get something out, a weak attempt to convince me that I had it all wrong. But I knew better. This wasn't some innocent misunderstanding. She had lied about where she was, about who she was with. And if she had nothing to hide, there wouldn't have been a need to lie in the first place. Even as she admitted to having dinner with another man, she tried to downplay it, insisting that it was meaningless. Just dinner. Just a friend. But the words rang hollow. If that were true, there wouldn't have been secrecy. There wouldn't have been deception. Sarcasm crept into my thoughts as I pieced it all together. A friend she needed to hide. A friend she kissed after dinner. Her eyes started to well up, as if tears could undo what had already been done. Maybe in the past, I would have fallen for that. But not this time. Not after seeing it for myself. She tried to shift the blame, saying she didn't know what she was doing, that she was confused. But that was a lie too. She knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't confusion, it was calculation. She was weighing her options, deciding whether what she had was good enough or if she could do better. Even now, she wouldn't say his name. I asked, but she flinched like the truth was too much to handle. It didn't matter. The name wouldn't change anything. What mattered was that she had been lying to my face while deciding if I was worth keeping around. She had assumed I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't put the pieces together. But she had underestimated me. What stung the most wasn't even the betrayal itself, it was the dishonesty. She could have been upfront, could have told me she was having doubts. Instead, she had kept me in the dark, stringing me along, making me believe things were fine while she tested the waters elsewhere. 3 years of my life wasted on someone who didn't even have the decency to be honest. Her tears came harder now, but I wasn't moved. She whispered that she never meant to hurt me, as if that made any difference. The damage had already been done. She had manipulated me, lied to me, made me look like a fool. And for what? To keep her options open in case her new prospect didn't work out? She tried to reach for my hand, to pull me back in. She begged to talk, to explain. But there was nothing left to explain. Her choices spoke louder than any excuse ever could. As she collapsed onto the couch, sobbing into her hands, I didn't move. I just watched as the reality of what she had done finally settled in. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't something that could be undone. This was betrayal, pure and simple. And there was no coming back from it. Even as she insisted she could fix it, that she would cut him off, that she would do whatever it took, I knew better. Some things couldn't be repaired. And some choices had consequences. She begged me not to give up on us, but the words felt empty, just another attempt to cling to something she had already shattered. A sharp, humorless laugh escaped me. Now she wanted to cut it off? Now, after everything? It was a little late for that. Her wide eyes locked onto mine, desperation creeping into her voice as she insisted that she loved me. But then came the real truth, the hesitation that had been there all along. She wasn't sure if I could give her everything she deserved. There it was. That word. Deserve. I repeated it, letting it hang in the air before asking what exactly she thought she was entitled to. A man to bankroll her lifestyle while keeping another in reserve for emotional support? A backup plan in case the better option fell through? She snapped, immediately denying it. But the act was over. The crocodile tears dried up in an instant, replaced by cold calculation. She wasn't remorseful, she was caught. And now, she was justifying it. She had been evaluating her options, thinking about her future. The anger inside me was slow burning, steady, controlled. So that's what she called it? Lying to my face, sneaking around, and tossing 3 years of trust aside, just part of the decision-making process. Then she took it one step further. Standing up, her face twisted with frustration, she spat out something that sealed it all. If I had bought her a better ring, she wouldn't have second-guessed anything. That was it. The final straw. I told her to get out. She blinked, as if she hadn't heard me right. But she had. I repeated myself, making it clear she wasn't going to insult me, pretend to be the victim, and then turn this into my fault. She was done here. Still, she hesitated. Grabbing her purse but refusing to move, she demanded to know if I was really throwing away 3 years over this. But she was missing the point. She had thrown them away the moment she decided I wasn't enough. The moment she started looking for a replacement. For a second, she just stood there, caught between anger and disbelief. Then she grabbed her phone and marched toward the bedroom, muttering that she'd pack. But not without getting in one last parting shot. She swore I would regret this. I didn't bother responding. There was nothing left to say. I wasn't going to waste another second arguing with someone who thought she could juggle 2 people like interchangeable options. From the doorway, I could hear her stomping around, slamming drawers, still muttering under her breath about how absurd I was. It didn't bother me. This was long overdue. She had been a walking disaster for years, and I was finally done cleaning up the mess. When she emerged with her bags, she shot me one last venomous glare, promising that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I just opened the door and gestured toward the outside. If that were true, she shouldn't have any trouble finding someone else foolish enough to make it with her. Without another word, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the silence settle. The weight of it all lifted almost immediately. 3 years lost, maybe, but I wasn't about to mourn the end of something that had been a lie for who knows how long. That same night, I started clearing out every trace of her. Her clutter, her overpriced beauty products, the heels she always left lying around, the cheap jewelry she hoarded, everything went into a box. I taped it shut and shoved it into a corner, making a mental note to text her that she could pick it up if she wanted. Or not. I didn't care. The days that followed were focused on moving forward. No distractions, no pity parties. Just life. But, of course, the aftershocks came soon enough. Mutual friends reached out concerned, curious. I kept my response simple. She made her choice, and I made mine. I wasn't about to turn this into some dramatic spectacle. If she wanted to play the victim online or spin a sob story to whoever would listen, that was her problem, not mine. A week later, she tried to reach me. Her name flashed on my phone screen, but I didn't hesitate. I declined the call. Moments later, a text followed. Can we talk? Please? I miss you. I didn't reply. What was left to say? She had already shown me who she was, and I had no interest in a second round. But karma didn't take long to catch up. A mutual friend eventually let it slip. Her so-called upgrade hadn't been looking for anything serious. The moment she dropped everything for him, he disappeared. No explanations, no second chances. She had bet everything on him and lost. When I heard that, I didn't feel anger. No satisfaction, either. Just indifference. Her choices were hers alone, and they had nothing to do with me anymore. She had set fire to the bridge, and I had no intention of rebuilding it. Not long after, someone asked if I was seeing anyone. I just shrugged. No rush. I had all the time in the world. When the right person comes along, it'll happen. But settling? That's never an option again. And I meant that. I walked away from it all stronger. She walked away with nothing. Now, whatever mess she made for herself, that was hers to clean up. Whether she regretted it or not. Didn't know. Didn't care. Honestly, it wasn't my problem anymore. If something interesting ever happened, maybe I'd update. Final update. Didn't think I'd be writing this, but here we are. She showed up at my door yesterday. Weeks had passed since I last saw her, so the sight of her standing there caught me off guard. But something was different. She wasn't smug, wasn't playing games. There was a new kind of desperation in her eyes. She asked if she could come in. I didn't move from where I was, just leaned against the doorframe, keeping my distance. That depended. What did she want? She dropped her gaze, hesitating before speaking. She'd been doing a lot of thinking. She realized she made a mistake. She hadn't appreciated me, hadn't valued what we had. She thought she needed more, but now she understood. None of it mattered without someone who actually cared about her. And I always had. I crossed my arms, watching her carefully. Yeah, she had made a mistake. She took a step closer, voice softer now. She chose me. She wanted to fix things, to prove she was serious. And in that moment, if even a tiny part of me had considered giving her another chance, it vanished completely. She chose me? Like she was doing me a favor? I asked the question before I could stop myself. And, of course, she latched onto it. Her face lit up like she thought she'd won. Yes, she said. The ring was perfect. She hadn't seen it before, but now she understood. That was it. That was all I needed to hear. Unbelievable. After all this time, after everything that had happened, the first thing out of her mouth wasn't about the damage she'd done, not about trust, not even about love. It was about the ring. The same ring she once said wasn't good enough. Did she even hear herself? The realization hit her too late. She stood there, stunned, as I shook my head. There was nothing left to discuss. I stepped back, motioning toward the hallway. This conversation was over. She made her choices. I made mine. We were done. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't waver. She insisted I didn't mean it, but I did. With a steady voice, I told her to take her game somewhere else. For a moment, she hesitated, like she thought there was still a chance. But when she saw there wasn't, she turned and walked away. I shut the door behind her without a second glance. And that was it. The book closed, the chapter ended. I was moving forward, and there was no looking back. If I took anything from this, it was this. Knowing your worth isn't just important, it's everything. Thanks for sticking with me through this story. If you enjoyed it, leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the next one.